A man found dead in an Austin neighborhood just blocks away from South Congress. How he got there and who killed him, all still a mystery more than 3 years later. This is Unsolved. As rain fell on the morning of Easter Sunday in 2022, police responded to reports of a man lying on a residential street in the South Congress neighborhood. Investigators say he had a gunshot wound and obvious trauma to his body. Only later was he identified as 35-year-old Cory Arizmendez. With no known witnesses, police struggled to piece together what led up to his death, leaving his family heartbroken and with questions year after year. We will hear from his mother today. And we'll take a closer look at some new video from the hours leading up to Cory's death that police say they hope will lead to a break in the case. Joining me today is Sergeant Shelley Holmstrom and Detective Patrick Reed. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So talk to me first and foremost about that morning in April. Who found Cory? What kind of call came in to police?
Yeah, so on the morning of April 17th, which was Easter Sunday in 2022, a man walking in the neighborhood found Cory lying in the street around 4:30 in the morning, and that is when he called 911.
In a neighborhood like that, you would think that if a homicide had happened, folks might have heard something. What do we know from other neighbors or folks in the area? Did anyone else see or hear how Cory got there?
No one called 911 with anything out of the ordinary that morning. Like I said, the only call that we received was from the neighbor that was walking in the street.
Now, when officers responded, what was that scene like?
So officers responded and arrived on scene, and they found the male who was identified as Cory lying in the road with obvious trauma. EMS arrived on scene, and they did pronounce Cory deceased at the scene. And then the officers began to work the crime scene and call detectives.
What kind of evidence was there? I mean, where do you start when you show up to a scene like that?
So we're looking for any surveillance video in the area, any witnesses in the area that maybe didn't call 911 but were on scene, and that there were none on the scene. We're also looking for any physical evidence at the scene, such as projectiles from fire cartridge cases from the gun. We're looking for any other obvious trauma to the body that indicates how he was assaulted and ultimately killed.
Talk about that term, obvious trauma. We reported on it at the time. What is that like? Does it indicate there might have been some kind of struggle that Cory was involved in?
Yeah, so Cory was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. So, but we did what obvious trauma he did was to his head, and that was a gunshot wound to the head.
Mm. Do we know, based on the scene, was Cory killed there in this neighborhood, or is there a chance he was killed elsewhere and moved to this neighborhood?
And that's what we aren't sure of yet, and that's why we are asking and pleading for the public's help for any information that they may have on Cory. We don't know exactly what happened still 3 years later.
Now, you do have some video that you're hoping the public might look at and see if they recognize. Walk us through what some of that video is.
So detectives gathered a canvas for a bunch of video. Obviously, we start at the neighborhood, right, where we found him. Ring camera footage, garage camera footage, and one of the problems that we have in many cases is those cameras just don't extend out into the roadway. People tend to make their settings so that those cameras are only activated when someone steps onto their driveway or up to their front porch. And so then we start extending out from there. And with the help of Cap Metro, we were able to obtain some video of the bus, the Halo cameras downtown. There's other places that we got some video from to try and somehow piece together a timeline where what Cory was doing the night he was killed.
And we're looking at some of that footage now, but walk us through, what are we looking at here? As you mentioned, he's on a bus. and then he starts to kind of walk through downtown Austin. Is there anything in that footage that jumps out to you that you want people to take note of?
Yeah, I think, obviously there doesn't appear there's anybody else on the bus with him at the time. And then he starts to make his way back downtown. And as you look through the video, he's kind of circling the entertainment district, that East 6th Street area. And he's making contact with a lot of people. We think that Cory frequented downtown, which many people do, and maybe had some connections, some friendly relationships with folks down there. People that may know kind of what his patterns are, where he goes, who he hangs out with, if he had any issues with anybody that maybe he was concerned about. So there's other folks in that video that we hope will come forward and help us kind of learn more about Cory, so we can maybe learn what happened to him that night.
Specifically, we see him walking with someone for what seems like a good amount of time over downtown. We don't know who that person is at this point?
No, and I mean, as you look at that video, we're able to identify Cory based on what he's wearing, right? Because we know what Cory was wearing. But if we didn't know what he was wearing, we wouldn't be able to make his face out. Like, it's the capabilities of the camera systems. So that extends to everybody else in the frames, in the footage. It just doesn't give us enough to be able to say, oh, we can probably figure out who that person is.
And what is that like, knowing that there is someone out there who was walking with Cory, speaking with Cory on what really was his last night, and not really knowing who that person is?
Yeah, it's very frustrating to us and to family and friends, and we wish that these people would come forward and tell us exactly what happened so we can get justice for Cory and his family.
You mentioned his family. We've spoken with them, with his mother, and she's obviously frustrated with how long it's taken to get answers in her son's case. She has a lot of questions and concerns. What is that like, knowing that you all have been working on this case for such a long time? What would you say to family members who are frustrated with the pace of the investigation?
So I understand the frustration, and we are frustrated as well. Typically, cases are solved sooner than 3 years. And I wish that I could have solved this case a lot faster for the family, but unfortunately I haven't. We haven't, but we haven't given up hope, and we are still actively trying to get this solved.
Yeah, I mean, you could just hear in Shelley's answer, right? Like she carries, we each carry the burden of the cases that we have. We want to bring justice to the family. We want to bring accountability to those that did harm to somebody else, and there's no end date there. There's no expiration date on that. I mean, we will continue to work this case as long as it takes to find who did this, why they did it, and bring them to justice for what they did.
What do we know about Cory's life here in Austin, and how has that played into the investigation at all? Do we know, friends or acquaintances, people who might have interacted with him before he died?
Yes, the people that we do know that he interacted with and were friends with, we have spoke to most of them, but there's still people out there that we haven't spoken with, that we don't know that he interacted with, such as what you'll see on the video. And those are the people that we would really like to come forward.
You all have asked for tips in the past in this case. Have you received anything from the public that's been helpful? What would you need to get this case solved, or at least get it one step closer to finding out what may have happened to Cory?
We have not received any viable tips from the public. So between around 1 a.m. and around 4:30 a.m., when Cory was discovered, we don't know where Cory was or what he was doing or who he was with. So any information to help us learn about what he was doing right before his death would be very beneficial to us to solve this case.
We know his mother was just devastated knowing he had just recently come to Austin. And when you speak with her, it's so clear that her son felt far away from her and from home, living in a different part of Texas. And so how does that play into your investigation, knowing that Cory wasn't living here for very long before his life was tragically taken?
That must be very hard for his family and specifically his mother to deal with, because she wasn't even here at the time when he died and was murdered. So that's even harder for her to deal with, because she's probably not that familiar with Austin either, and maybe he wasn't either, but we're just, again, asking for more help from the public.
I think from an investigative standpoint, to your question, like he didn't have that footprint here, right? Like somebody that's lived here for several years or their whole life, the folks that he was living with or staying with, there were only a handful of them. We were able to talk to them, but he just doesn't have that big of a footprint here, like a lot of people do, that we can start to unravel and dissect to figure out who his friends were, who he had dealings with, relationships with, maybe that could have turned sour. So very small footprint, so just not a lot of information to pull from.
Mm. We've talked a lot about the footage in this case, and I think something that has jumped out to folks about this situation is how close it was to South Congress, such a busy commercial area, such an iconic part of Austin, as is downtown, where we know he was the night before his death. Is there any indication or footage or anything from the South Congress area that connects him to this area, why he might have been south of the river after spending his evening in downtown?
No, we don't know why he was found on Milton Street. We know that he was living in South Austin, but we don't have any connection to him on South Congress or specifically Milton Street.
What else has made this investigation difficult? I know you've talked about not a lot of evidence at the scene, no known witnesses. Are there any other barriers that have proved to be hurdles in this case?
I think another hurdle is the lack of evidence on the scene, and that's something that we're having to overcome. He had a gunshot wound to his head, but we're just still lacking the evidence that we typically discover at crime scenes.
Can you expand on what kind of evidence you're normally finding at a crime scene that's lacking in this case?
I think in some ways, yeah. I mean, there's some things, we try to play a little closer to the vest, but so yeah, I think in this case, some of the things that the normal investigative leads that we would at least have to work off of, just in the minutes and hours and maybe even a couple of days after the investigation starts, they just weren't present there. So when you think about technology and it's just the way the world is in 2022, 2025, some of that stuff wasn't present, and so it's kind of one less layer of evidence that we have to work with.
We're talking about the technology. Typically, we know folks' cell phones give everybody, whether it's investigators or even just a friend, a pretty good idea of what someone's been doing over the last few days, hours. Did he not have a working cell phone on him at the time?
And that's a hurdle that we've faced in this case. He did not have a working cell phone on him, so that prevents a lot of evidence that we usually can get after a murder.
You mentioned the gunshot wound, but we want to know what kind of DNA testing or ballistics testing is being done in this case.
Yeah, so ballistics testing is an ongoing thing, and so as well as DNA. So we're still working through the DNA processing and layering that and trying to find new and creative ways to seek out new DNA testing for what we do have. But again, based on what was recovered on scene, we're very limited to what's available to be tested.
Is that something that is becoming more and more standard in cases? I mean, how frequently are you sending off things for DNA testing? Does that happen in every homicide case?
So I don't think it's hard to say every case, right? Because every case is so unique. But it's pretty common. DNA testing, ballistics testing, looking at a victim's cell phone to kind of see what their moments were leading up to when the event occurred. Those are pretty standard in most cases.
And with the DNA testing, since that's ongoing, is that something that you all did right away, or is that something that you're trying now, given that other leads haven't come to fruition?
Yes, the DNA was submitted pretty early on after the murder occurred. And that DNA was submitted for his clothing, his hands, anywhere on his body that someone may have touched, to try to collect that touch DNA from another source.
I think one of the things that folks have a misconception about when it comes to unsolved cases is that, you send that DNA in and a match comes back right away. I know you mentioned that was submitted early on. Has that been resubmitted? Or I guess my question being, talk about the process of that it really isn't an instantaneous match necessarily from what we understand.
Right, so not everyone's DNA is in the system. So every time you submit an outside source, you're not always going to get a hit. Most times you're not. And then throughout the investigation, there is new DNA with new suspects that we acquire, and that DNA can be submitted and compared to the DNA that we obtained from the victim.
Mm. In addition to the testing that you mentioned is ongoing, and of course you're asking for tips today from the public, anyone who sees this video and knows something from that night, what will it take to get some movement in this case? Do you think it will take someone from the public coming forward?
I think where we're at in the investigation, there's always, technology is ever changing. We're constantly finding new ways to test for DNA, to even just be able to collect enough DNA to get a profile on someone. 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, the technology is advancing so quickly. So I don't want to say it's exclusively on that, but man, that's going to be a huge piece of this, is who are these people that were with Cory, like Shelley said. We see him downtown. We know that he's downtown up until about 1 a.m. He's with people. What happened from 1 a.m. until the resident of that neighborhood found him there? That's a pretty small window of time, all things considered. So anyone that was around with him that night, or knows him or knew him from downtown, can really help us understand his patterns of movement and why maybe what happened during that time frame that we're lacking.
For, again, family who may be frustrated, or folks at home who are trying to understand what the hang-ups in a case like this are, do you believe that Austin Police and your team is doing everything they can in this investigation to get it solved?
I do. I know that we have done everything that we can, and we will continue doing this to find justice for Cory and his family.
Anything else you want people at home to know as they're watching this? Anything that could be helpful for the investigation?
If you think you know something, there's nothing that's too small to reach out to us and share that information. So I think oftentimes people, they think they have a piece of information, but they feel like it's irrelevant, or it's a minuscule piece of information. But that could be the piece that changes everything, that points us in the right direction and gives us something to work off of.
Detectives, thank you so much for being here, for giving us this context on this case and your continued work on it. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up after the break, we will sit down with Cory's mother to talk about their family's questions and their grief 3 years later. Stick with us. So, Annette Martinez, Cory Arizmendez's mother, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Talk to me first and foremost about your son. Who was he?
Well, he was highly intelligent. I just watched a video of what he did with the politics a couple of years ago. Genius level. He knew 9 Bibles inside and out. He never wanted to be a theologian, but it was his specialty. He loved debating on any topic. He researched a lot. He became a father at 23. And Caden, love of his life. You know, he couldn't support like financially a whole lot, but he had a village, and we all raised her. And any moment that he had with her was at museums, parks, the forest, fishing. I mean, he loved nature. He loved speaking on truth, his truth. He moved here a year and a half before he was murdered. He moved here to Austin to be closer to his second daughter, and to try and have more access to her. And he became a steel worker. So he was building out here a lot of the skyscrapers, and I know that he worked at the Tesla area for a little bit, and then his arm was broken there. He loved being certified in machinery and liked putting in his 2 cents everywhere. So he's just highly intelligent, fierce protector of his siblings, Christian and Avery. That's the love of his lives. I mean, he would protect them and me at any cost. I mean, he was just that way. Before it happened, he was going to be, you know, I asked him, come home, just come home. And he's like, no, Mama, they'll follow me. So even then, he was protecting us because he just felt that we would be in danger. But, I mean, years and years ago, he was in high school. And I'll never forget because they wanted to do intros to Mensa and so forth. And again, he's very articulate in what he does. And he's like, do you know what Mensa means? And in front of a whole school board, you know, and he's like, Mensa in Spanish means dumb. He's like, no, I don't want to do that. So, but that was his way. Like, he never had to prove himself to anyone. He did get in legal trouble a few times. Nothing that hurt anybody else. Of course, it hurt our family. He had a drinking problem, and so he got in trouble, you know, and we didn't bail him out. He had to pay the price for it, but never robbery or anything like that whatsoever. It was always drinking. So, and he owned it. That's one thing about Cory. He was so honest, and he owned it. A lot of his videos, if you look on Facebook under, I think it's Cory Arizmendez, he told you, I was a 3-time loser, but look at me. Every time you fall, you get up, you know. And one of the biggest things that I taught all of my children, and it passed on to him, was you never look down at anybody. You always look down to lift them up only. And he was a true believer in that. And when he moved here, he let me know about a homeless encampment he came across. And I was so proud of him, right? Because he would let me know. He didn't make much money. When he first moved here, it was a homeless shelter, the Salvation Army. He worked and got his certifications, and he started helping the homeless people. And he met one young person, I don't want to say his name, but he was very fond of him. He let me know about his past, his record, being in prison. He's like, Mama, you said, don't look. It's like, I know, honey, just be safe. Just be safe. And that's what he was doing when he was out here, was reaching out to others, you know, feeding the birds. There's quite a few funny commentaries that he did, chasing a pigeon in downtown Pedro that owed him money. Just ridiculous stuff like that, because he always wanted to make people laugh, you know. And at one point, he was diagnosed with a certain type of cancer, and he never wanted to talk about it. You know, he was very, very quiet about it. And when he finally did, it was like, this isn't to let you know or have pity. It's like to let you know that every day counts, you know. And he's like, the one thing that's happening to me now is killing me, and now I want to live. So, and that's just the kind of person he was. He was always reaching out, always helping, always offering advice. And again, highly intelligent. You could not talk to him about religion without him taking you to school. Because he just, even me, and I have a huge faith, and he would talk to me about, you know, certain things and so forth. Great debater. I mean, I just loved him for that. It's one of the things I miss the most. We would have 3, 4, 5-hour conversations. Sometimes the sun would be coming up, and he did it with his brother and sister as well. You know, just debate over anything, you know, conspiracy theories and so forth. He talked about church a lot, talked about our neighbors or certain people that had done wrong. And he's like, don't you think that we should just talk to them? He always believed people crossed his path for a reason. And I believed in that too. I really did. He just loved people. He loved to engage. And of course, we were all heartbroken, you know, and his daughter has been the greatest piece of masterpiece that, you know, he's ever created, he would always say. And it was a few years ago, he actually did a little monologue on Easter Sunday and what it really meant, the summer solstice and the beginning of new and so forth, because he wanted her to understand while it was great to celebrate Easter, but to look at the faith and the religious side of it. And it's just ironic that he was actually murdered on Resurrection Sunday at 3-something in the morning. It was the only way that we could cope. Like, someone took his life, but God opened the gates for him on that day because it was Resurrection Sunday. So,
tell me a little bit, and I'm sure it's really tough to talk about, but tell me about that day. When did you find out that you had lost Cory?
I found out 3 days later. Sunday, just a little bit. I had been in the hospital. I got out and I talked to him Friday, and he'd said, Mom, I have a lot to catch up with you on. He'd been telling me a lot about people that were following him or threatening him, and he knew he was going to be killed. He's like, Mom, they're going to kill me. He would go to the library every day, and I know my son. He pulled information. He may have saved it to his email. I don't know, have his records. I imagine the police do. But up to that day, even that Saturday, he borrowed a phone and called me and was like, Mom, I need to talk to you. I promise I'm calling tomorrow. I had Kaden, his daughter, and he never called. And Sunday, I usually send out, happy resurrection, blessings, and so forth. I didn't do it. It wasn't a bad day. It just wasn't, it felt different. And I still didn't know. Monday, when his daughter was going to go back, she's like, and it rings in my head to this day, because she asked me, like, Nana, can we call Daddy? And I was like, of course, sweetheart, but he's just not answering. And we didn't know. And that morning, a friend of his that he was rooming with had called me. Never called me before, but that was on a Monday morning before 8 o'clock. And I called it back, and I'm like, hey, you called? And he's like, who's this? And I'm like, Cory's mom. He's like, yeah, have you seen Cory? Have you heard from him? I'm like, no, I talked to him Saturday. I haven't. Why would I? Oh, never mind. I just haven't seen him. Again, I knew nothing. That was Monday. And then Tuesday, I was getting calls from an Austin call center. I'm not sure. It was shocking to me because Fort Bend County was calling me, letting me know, hey, we're at your parents' house. We need to talk to your dad. And I was like, my dad? Like, he's elderly. Why are you at my parents' house? Don't scare him. They're like, we've been knocking on the door, and don't worry, we're going to get it. And I got scared, right? Mm-hmm. Because if my dad doesn't hear, what if they break in the house? So they're like, can you meet us here? It's so strange. Again, it was about 3:30 in the afternoon. And I told my husband, like, hey, there's police at my parents' house. It was Fort Bend. It wasn't even Austin. And I was like, I can't find my keys, panic mode. And my husband's like, yeah, but my gas, it's kind of low. And I was like, So I drove off and I called him, hey, are you sure I'm going to make it? And about a quarter mile before my parents' home, we lived about 10 miles apart, the truck ran out of gas. So I'm calling my parents and I'm trying to hey, Mom, Dad, the cops are at your house. I don't know why they're there. Wait for me. And as I'm walking down the road, I see my parents' truck cross over at the 4-way. And I'm walking as quickly as I can, thinking, oh my God, please don't let it be anything big. I got to the stop sign and my dad came in his white truck and parked in the median. And I got in the truck and I'm like, Dad, what's going on? And I knew something was wrong. And it hurts me to this day because it was my father that told me in not so many words. And he said, Mija, prepare yourself. And I'm like, what? And he said, it's Cory. And I knew. I knew. I broke down and I screamed and cried and turned the truck around and we drove to my parents. And one of the sheriff officers were like, we need to tell you that, your son is no longer alive. And I'm like, was he murdered? I mean, I was screaming, was he murdered? Because he told me he was going to be. A part of you dies, literally. I never knew what that meant. I never knew what it would be like to move on with a soul not with you anymore. And my husband showed up with my truck that had gas. And, my mom and dad were trying to calm me down. I was besides myself. I mean, it was awful. And I kept screaming at them like I told him to come home. I begged him to come home, and he didn't. And of course, I blamed myself. You know, if only we'd gotten that ticket for the bus, if only he'd come home. I grabbed the keys to my truck. I left. I know they were calling me. I couldn't do it. My first thoughts were, how do I tell his brother and sister? How do I tell them? And to this day, I don't know the words. I know that I went to the house. I sat down and called my daughter, and I said, I need you to get your brother on the phone. I don't know how I told them. My daughter has told me that she's still traumatized to this day. Anytime she sees me call in the middle of the day, because she doesn't want to hear that message. My son has let me know that to this day, sometimes when it's too hard, he pretends he doesn't have a brother because it's too hard, you know. So that day was just a lot of chaos, a lot of chaos.
Thank you for walking us back through it. I know it must be painful to relive it. Talk to us about what it has been like in the days and the years since.
The days after, I've had discussions with, especially my children, because I was always the strong one. For the most part, I raised them as a single mom, all of them. And we had our own circle. Now, we do have a village, don't get me wrong. I have my parents, my brothers, my sister, and they have their dad's side. They've always been a village, but I raised them on my own. And someone put a dent in our circle. And, you know, I let them know it's bent, but it's not broken. And my daughter let me know. I mean, there were people, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I would scream, I didn't lose him, he was taken. Just the sheer anger. It just, I couldn't grapple with it. Like, I knew he was gone. I just wanted to know who. And so I've had so much anger, right? The week before Cory's murder, you know, there was Mariah Wilson, and I talked to the detectives about that. You know, you put all your money and resources into finding her killer, and you did it literally within weeks. And then Uvalde happened after, and my son got lost in the middle. And I was so angry, and I still pray on it, because I was like, at least you know who killed yours. I don't. I had nowhere to put my anger. And I never liked saying hate. It's such a strong word, but I had so much of that. And my own daughter had to distance herself from me because she could feel it. And I would never want to do that. And I've had to let them both know, I'm sorry that I wasn't there for you. I failed you as a mom to be there. When they lost their brother, I wasn't the only one that lost. You know, Cory was their protector. And anything and everything they needed, they lost that. My daughter lost her best friend. And having to cope with that in the years since, it's been 3.5 years now. And we still talk about it. Not so much the actual murder. We're just getting to a place where we actually laugh. We can see videos and laugh and like, remember your Uncle Cory did this or what? We're just getting to that place. And as I've told many of my friends, especially my closest friends, which nobody will ever know till now, I have a best friend. And no one outside of that knows that she answers my calls at midnight. And she stays on the phone with me until 4 or 5 in the morning. The sun's coming up. Because I have nowhere else to put that grief or how to express it. And she's always there. Always. And I've done that a handful of times, and I've had to, like, I'm so sorry. She's like, no. You know, you grieve in your own way. Tried going to the doctors, and, you know, they want to prescribe depressants, right? And I've let them know repeatedly, I am not depressed. I am grieving, and I'm angry. There's no cure for that. So it's been like walking in 2 different worlds. I find my joy with my grandkids. We have many, many moments with our families. You know, Christmas is hard. His birthday was very difficult, his first one. My very first birthday after he was killed, it was the very first time in his entire life that he wasn't with me or called me. to wish me a happy birthday. That was probably the most difficult. Just the call was never going to come. And it was so hard. And I did have to take a day off. Like, I couldn't deal with it. In March, he had left me, before he was killed, he'd left me a voicemail. You know, hey, Mom, we did this, you know, get my phone. We're trying to get his phone. And I was like, hey, when you learn to start talking right to me, you call me back. And I hung up. And he called me back and he left me a voicemail. Mom, sorry. Didn't mean to, you know, make you mad. And he's like, I love you. And that's the last voicemail I have. So life is before and after. Anything that we see, anything I see, you know, with an anniversary coming up, oh, that's 2 years after Cory died. Oh, that was a year before he died. Oh, that's 6 months before his birthday. Everything now relates back to that day, which tilted our world. And I've never lived the same life again. I've lost who I was, and I'm trying to be a good person now for him, his kids, my grandkids. I'm trying really hard to hang on. I want a place. I need faces, names to put that anger towards so that I can forgive. I don't even know who to forgive right now. And I can't forgive myself because I failed him. I failed to bring him home. So it's just it's a different life. You know, you walk two separate lives, and I never thought that was possible.
Thank you so much for your honesty. We've talked on this show before about how when something like this happens, we cover it here at the news, but for families, for friends, it never stops. And so thank you for giving us a glimpse into your grief. There's no words to give you, but thank you. I do want to ask you, you mentioned, you know, being able to put a name or a face to that anger. What would it mean to you to get Cory's case solved?
For me, and I've thought about it a long time, I've had time to. Originally, it was like, I can hate you now, and I don't want to do, that's not who I am. It's not who I raised my kids to be. To get this case solved, and I'm begging Austin, you have a killer or killers on your street that can do the same thing that they did to my son. There's a criminal that's walking out there, and I want to protect our community, our people, the children that are walking out there. I never want another person to have to lose, not just a son, he was a father, but for that child to grow up fatherless. The community needs to truly hang on to each other, protect each other, and know that, you know, unfortunately, there is evil out there. And the best that we can do is locate them, give them their due process, put them to the system, and hopefully they never see the light of day again. I want to be able to say, hey, son, because of you, these people are now off the street and they can't hurt anybody else. That's what it would mean for me.
We know Austin police have some video showing Cory in the hours leading up to his death. And in some of those videos, he's conversing with people, he's walking with someone, and detectives told us that it would be really crucial if those people who might have interacted with him came forward. Do you have a message for anybody who might have seen anything or known what happened to Cory before his death or leading up to his death?
I do. Every day in life, we are witnesses to so much that we don't even know. We truly are. In the area that Cory lived, and many people who knew Cory out here, he went to the library. He visited the Capitol countless times. He was out here when there were rallies and so forth. I know people got to know him because he was a frequent visitor, especially off of Congress. And if you're out there and if you saw anything or you talked to him, you know, for me, if you happen to have seen him, if you could share his last words, what he was doing, you know, was he excited about something? But most importantly, go back through your photos in your phone, videos that you may have taken on that evening. Again, it was the night before Easter. So a lot of people were prepping, going to the store, or even celebrating. You may have seen something or captured something you don't even know. You know, please go through that, because the way that my son was executed, it gives me nightmares knowing that somebody might do that to someone else and take their loved one away. You know, I say, for the love of love, look at what you may or may not have. If you're afraid, you know, call, you know, anonymously or whatever it may be, because being silent is being complicit. And unfortunately, that doesn't move us forward.
I do want to ask you, we had let the detectives know that in our conversations, I know there's been some frustration about the pace of the investigation and some of the things that were done or not done. Is there anything that you would like to say? I know people sitting at home must be thinking, you know, 3.5 years, they can only imagine putting themselves in your shoes, waiting for those answers for that long. But is there anything that you would like to say about that?
I would like to speak out to the Austin Police Department, or any police department for that matter. You know, we grew up watching crime shows and so forth, and there was always that one detective or that one group that's like, we're never going to give up, you know, and they would call and keep them updated and so forth. And I feel that if you reach out to the people that are actually grieving and let them know that you're actually doing something, even if there is no progress, just a checkup, which I never got, not once. I've left message after message. I'd call the 411 and go through the dispatch and leave messages. And one of the biggest things that I feel many departments fail to do is to connect with the living people that are still here. And those people, they have nightmares. They imagine the worst of the worst. They feel like they are forgotten because no one's calling them, no one's keeping them updated. And we're human beings at the end of the day. And like for me, every worst case scenario, you know, did he cry for me? Did he cry for his daughter? Did he put up a fight? You know, these are nightmares that police departments, that they can actually help if they reach out to the family and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Even if you've got nothing yet, touching these people's lives, because they've already been touched in the worst way. If you just reach out, they're a part of your community. They help build your community.
Is there anything else you want to leave people with as they hear this story about your son and they hear about his case again? Is there anything you want them to keep in mind about Cory?
I would love people to know, you know, he was so loved. His daughter turned 15 a couple of years after. He passed away, and that side of the family, all the families came together and we honored Cory. And I just want you to imagine a 15-year-old girl who lost her dad, and she had a life-size poster made of him, a cardboard poster. And she danced with her daddy for the father-daughter dance. And while it was surreal, you know, to watch that, it was so painful. But to understand about Cory that he'll never see her graduate or get married or know if he has grandkids. And the people who took his life, because she's the only Arizmendez and she is a girl, they didn't just kill him, they killed his bloodline. And I want you to know that how much he truly, truly loved being a dad and wanted to be married. And he wanted so much to get all his certifications and be a part of his kids' lives, that it was so important to him. And the biggest takeaway is that he loved anyone and everyone that he knew. He's just a loving person.
Annette, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing more about him and your family. We really, really appreciate it. Join us next week on KXAN Plus for another episode of Unsolved Central Texas. New episodes air every Thursday at 1. And watch any episode anytime. Just go to KXAN.com or look for the KXAN Plus Originals category on our streaming app. We'll see you next week.